So if someone is trying to tell you, for instance, that governments must fund education, right, then they're trying to box you in, because then you have to say, well, education is unimportant. Who's going to say that? No one. Or then you have to say, well, something other than the government could fund education, and then you're into, well, the government for sure is going to fund it, but other people might or might not, so you're going to get a more consistent funding with government education and so on. So you're into all of these, what I call arguments from effect. Well, you want the most people to be educated, you want the poor people to be educated, therefore government schools, right? Now, if somebody says, if somebody makes that argument, I would come back with, okay, well, what is virtue? What is goodness? What is the right way of living? How do we differentiate good from evil? Before we start jumping into how should poor people be educated, let's figure out if you even know what is good and what is evil, what is right and what is wrong. How is something true or false? Now, most people, i.e. 99.9% of people engaged in any kind of dispute or debate, most people have not built their arguments up from raw first principles. That's the job of a philosopher, to assume you know nothing, to build up what you know from raw first principles, from sense data, from the five senses, from the logic which is derived from the consistent behavior of matter outside the flesh prison of our skulls, and to recognize that, you know, concepts are imperfectly derived from instances, which is basically to say that empiricism trumps pure reason. You build up your whole system of belief from the raw data of sense and logic, and the fact that we have concepts because matter behaves in consistent matters. A tree is something like another tree because there are atoms that behave consistently, which is why we can have concepts, and why we know that water is different from sand because H2O is different from the silica that makes up sand. So you really have to, like Socrates, assume you know nothing. Hey, do you want to know what I had to accept? The content of my mind was, when I began, oh Lord, 32 years ago, the journey of philosophy. I'm going to just step down for a moment. Okay, you see that white space? Ooh, okay, in the podcast, imagine you're inside a hermetically sealed ping pong ball where you can't have shows too long because you'll run out of air. Okay, you see that white space? That was the content of my mind, which I had to scrub blank before attempting to learn anything. And I'm back. Look! See how I'm slowly coming into focus? That's philosophy, baby. So most people, when they're making an argument, have not started from the blank wall and built their beliefs up systematically, piece by piece, assuming they know nothing from raw sense data and logic. Just haven't done it. Why? Because they're out enjoying themselves rather than plowing their way through grad school, attempting to write a pretty comprehensive theory of Western philosophy. Philosophy nerd alert. Yes, indeed. I really should come in a pest dispenser with the others. But anyway. So when somebody puts forward a moral argument and you say, well, what is virtue, what is truth, what is goodness, before we get to all of that, then you have to ask them, how are they building up their argument? Very, very few people have ever done that. Now, if a mathematician puts forward an argument, you can ask him to take you all the way from the times table through algebra, through vector calculus, through, you name it, functions and relations. You can ask him to take you all the way through the steps. It may take a long time, but he can get you there. Because he started with goo goo gaga, blowing spit bubbles and farting against the wall like we all did. And then he learned numbers, counted his finger, and he ends up with the highest abstractions in mathematics. He can take you through the whole step. In the same way, a competent philosopher who puts forward an argument can have that argument broken down to its absolute raw constituent components, and will be able to build it back up again from scratch, from assuming, right, the blank wall of nothingness. You can then get an argument. Sophists don't do that. Sophists figure out what moves people emotionally, and what moves people emotionally is desire and fear, right? Desire to be thought well of, and fear of being thought badly of, because we are a social species. We are not cats, we are dogs. We are bound together in the web of social approval, which is why philosophy tends to be so powerful, and why sophistry is so effective. And so this idea that if you want to help the poor, got to have a government program, plays into people's desire to help the poor, of course, plays into people's desire to want to be thought well of. well, if I oppose this government program, people are going to think I don't like the poor. It's going to make me look cold and mean. Therefore, yay, government program, right? And it's not, but I don't want to make this a sort of political argument. It really could be about anything. It could be about immigration. It could be about aid to single mothers. It could be any number of things. And so we want to be thought well of, and we're afraid of being thought badly of. And so a sophist will play on that kind of situation. You know, there was the argument that was made by a number of people, if you don't vote for Obama, you must be a racist. In other words, apparently it's not racist to take Obama's biracial nature into a primary consideration when you are voting. Apparently only focusing on his race is not racist, but evaluating his policies and his thoughts and arguments, apparently that is racist. Anyway, so a sophist is unable to break down his or her arguments into their component pieces. So when you take the Socratic approach and you say, well, how do you know, before we get into, you know, how should money be herded around the economic plane by the endless flamethrowers of government power, how about we actually figure out how you know truth from falsehood? This should be really the peak of a long chain of reasoning. And anybody who wants you to accept the conclusions without wanting to step you through the premises, the syllogisms, the arguments, the axioms, and so on, anyone who's not willing to step you through the argument but wants you to accept the conclusion is a sophist and is using that argument in an emotionally manipulative way in order to get you to do what he or she wants. And that is a very, very dangerous position to be in. Because somebody who doesn't want to bring you arguments from first principles but simply wants you to obey their conclusions, I mean, they're kind of a social fascist. That's a strong way, but not like a fascist with a gun to your head, but they are definitely attempting to control you and get you to do what they want by using the appearance of philosophy. Philosophy is supposed to empower others. It's supposed to get you to think. It's supposed to be able to train you to evaluate information and arguments on your own. It's supposed to, you know, make you independent, right? Or as Nietzsche said, it is a poor student who does not repay his master by outgrowing him, or repay his teacher. So sophistry wants you to obey emotionally laden non-arguments, whereas philosophy says, look, if I teach you first principles, you don't need you don't need me, you don't need anybody. You need to think for yourself. And sophistry is designed to make you dependent upon the approval or disapproval of the sophist. Now, the sophist was dangerous enough prior to the mainstream media. And mainstream media now can amplify this kind of stuff to the point where people can be subject to these media witch hunts and so on. And dirt can be dug up and crazy things can be found out and amplified lies can be invented and so on. And so this, the power of sophistry has gained a huge boost through the power of the prostitutes, the reporters, the press, in being able to amplify this kind of stuff. So when you are in the presence of a sophist, the sophist will not want you to ask, how do you know what you know? To ask the Socratic reasoning. Well, wait a second. So you're saying that helping the poor is a moral good, and then you're saying that giving money to the poor is the best, if not the only way to help them. And then you're saying only the government can give money to the poor. And then you're saying that government has money to give, which it doesn't. The government has nothing. It creates nothing. It can only transfer through force, through taxation. It can only borrow, which is to create unfunded obligations on the part of other people who've not signed a contract, which is illegal outside the government, or it can print money, which is counterfeiting. So the government can create unjust contracts, it can steal, or it can counterfeit, and that's how we can best help the poor. So if somebody is not willing to break down their argument from first principles, then you're in the presence of a sophist, and you'll feel that pressure in your head and in your heart, and you'll feel a reluctance to ask for first principles, right? Because it'll be like, whoa, we're way ahead. We're not circling back to have you catch up. Let's just keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. And when you are in the presence of a sophist, you will feel a very strong emotional reluctance to ask that person for first principles because they're kind of casting this spell, right? There's a reason why magic is based on words and gestures, because sophistry is a kind of magic that can move mountains and create dams and have it rain gold upon the sometimes undeserving. A sophist with political power can do, quote, magical things. I mean, when I played Dungeons and Dragons as a teenager, there was a fireball spell. And it's like you say these words. Well, this is, of course, giving the order to shoot a cannon, which only results as a result of sophistry. So you'll feel this intense emotional reluctance, like you won't want to ask that basic question. And if you do ask that ancient question, how do you know? How do you know what you know? What is virtue, and so on? Then the sophists will regard you, as French waiters are supposed to, as if they're peeing on you from a great height, and you will be mocked and excluded and all that. So when you feel that pressure to not ask first principles, nobody feels that pressure when they call in to me. And these call-in shows, we're doing one tonight. It's a Wednesday night, and Saturday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern. You can go to freedomainradio.com and figure out how to join and how to listen in. Nobody has any problem asking me for first principles. In fact, I find that very good. I'm very happy to talk about first principles. Sophists or not, they strongly resist first principles. They will distract, they will avoid, they will insult, they will roll their eyes, they will do all of the emotional tricks that somehow stamp you with the wagging finger mom word inappropriate or something like that. And that's how you know that you are in the presence of a sophist. So ask the Socratic questions. Ask the person to build up their argument from first principles. The old thing, explain it to me like I'm 3 years old, like I know nothing, like my head is the inside of a ping pong ball, like I'm auditioning for the Lego Movie 2. That is what you want people to do. And most people will strongly resist that. Or they'll talk about tradition or law or all of these things which are not philosophical arguments. The law fundamentally is an opinion with a gun, and tradition is mostly the accumulated prejudices of prior sophists. So if somebody comes up with a moral argument to you and you ask them to break it down into first principles and they resist, you know you are in the presence of a sophist. And please, please do not dishonor philosophy by pretending that sophistry is philosophy. I don't care if the robot spine glows nuclear pink. Don't have sex with the robot and think you're going to make another human being. So I just wanted to leave you with a quote, William Cowper, The Progress of Error. As creeping ivy clings to wood or stone and hides the ruin that it feeds upon, so sophistry cleaves close to and protects sin's rotten trunk, concealing its defects. And if we substitute irrationality for sin, which is the Hades of philosophy, I think we can see where old Bill Cowper was coming from. So fight for the truth, resist sophistry, and save mankind in the process. Thank you so much. Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio. We will talk to you soon.